From The National, this is Trending Middle East. I'm Ban Barqawi. It's Thursday, April 17. Here are today's headlines. Talks between Washington and Tehran later this week will set a framework to discuss Iran's nuclear program, a senior U.S. official said on Wednesday. This would be the second time Iranian and U.S. envoys meet after indirect negotiations hosted by Oman took place last week. Speaking during a panel at the Soleimani Forum in Iraq, U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary for Iraq and Iran, Victoria Taylor, described the first round of talks as positive and constructive. The National's Aveen Karim reports from the forum.
U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary for Iraq and Iran, Victoria Taylor, at the Soleimani Forum said that the U.S. was trying to chart a path forward during the second round of talks that are set to take place at the end of this week between Iran and the U.S. She did say it was still early to sort of say where the parameters are with regards to negotiations, but that the second round of talks were aimed at forming a framework for future talks. She did state, however, that despite talks taking place between the U.S. and Iran, President Donald Trump still remains very firm on his policy of maximum pressure that we saw a return to once he came back to office.
Iran says its nuclear program is purely for peaceful purposes, but the UN's nuclear watchdog has raised the alarm over its uranium enrichment levels. Ms. Taylor said that the U.S. was also still concerned about the country's support for proxy militia groups in the Middle East.
The interesting part of this discussion was the fact that she was speaking on a panel at the forum, and she was speaking right in front of the Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Saeed Khatibzadeh, who was sitting in the front row. So it's just very interesting to see her making these statements about talks with Iran, about how firm the U.S. is on maximum pressure and preventing Iranian access to funds. What she said was funding its nuclear activity and backing of proxy networks in the region.
Tensions between Algeria and France have flared up this week amid tit-for-tat diplomat expulsions. On Wednesday, French Foreign Affairs Minister Jean-Noël Barrot accused Algeria of escalating a months-long dispute between the two countries. His remarks followed the expulsion of 12 Algerian diplomats from France on Tuesday and the recall of the French ambassador for consultations. The move was a response to Algeria's decision to expel 12 French officials from the embassy in Algiers. French media have described the retaliatory measures as the worst diplomatic rupture since Algerian independence in 1962. Sunniva Rose reports.
So relations between France and Algeria have been really tense since last summer after President Emmanuel Macron sided with Morocco in its claim on the Western Sahara, and that's a big deal for Algeria because they support an independentist movement there. But, relations seem to have eased a little bit earlier this month after French Foreign Affairs Minister Jean-Noël Barrot visited Algeria. There was a cordial exchange with President Abdelmajid Tebboune in Algiers. They shook hands and they said, Barrot said that he hoped that relations were back to normal. But that détente only lasted less than a week.
3 Algerian nationals in France were arrested, including a consular official last week, in connection with the abduction last year of a prominent government critic. Algeria called the arrests unacceptable.
For Algiers, this arrest is political and instrumentalized by Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau, who has in the past months become the most vocal critic of Algeria, and he wants all migration agreements with Algeria to be revoked. But Mr. Barrot, the Foreign Affairs Minister, has insisted the French judiciary is independent. It was not a political decision, and Algeria should respect that. Algeria hasn't accepted those arguments, however, and they gave 48 hours to 12 French officials working at the French embassy in Algeria to leave.
France is a former colonial power of Algeria, and the legacy of the War of Independence remains a deeply sensitive and unresolved chapter in both nations' histories. Egypt's finance minister has presented an ambitious national budget to parliament proposing record spending, tax hikes, and subsidy cuts. Minister Ahmed Kujouk's budget proposal forecasts a 23% increase in public revenues, with tax revenues accounting for 13% of GDP. The plan will rely heavily on continued borrowing and subsidy reductions as part of Egypt's commitment to implement economic reforms under its $8 billion agreement with the International Monetary Fund. Mr. Kujouk defended the borrowing plan as necessary to fund critical investments in healthcare, education, and social protection. The National's Kamal Tabikha has more.
So right off the bat, the budget is a surprise in how large it has gotten. Now, with such a high bill, there's a lot of questions about how the government is going to pay for such a high level of expenditure. And so firstly, the budget shows that the tax revenues for the next year are going to account for 2.6 trillion Egyptian pounds, approximately 13% of GDP. This is the highest tax to GDP ratio in a decade for Egypt, and to cover the rest of its expenditures, the Egyptian government will be borrowing more money. So it is expected that 3.6 trillion Egyptian pounds will be borrowed for the next year, which is one of the most contentious areas of the budget, I think. There are a lot of concerns over the high debt levels. A lot of parliamentarians have been speaking to media over the past couple of weeks, highlighting the pressures that such high debt levels put on the economy and on the average citizen. Now, the finance minister did discuss the debt levels yesterday when he addressed Parliament, and he said that there will be concerted efforts to bring it down, but that most likely this would take place during the fiscal year after next.
Earlier this month, the government raised fuel prices for the first time in 2025, with petrol and diesel rates increasing by up to 14.8%. The move is the most recent in a series of subsidy cuts on food and energy that was a key condition of the IMF loan. Another round of fuel price hikes is planned for October.
So under the new budget, energy subsidies have been slashed by half, so down from 147 billion Egyptian pounds last year to 75 billion this year. Although the finance minister did address the drop in energy subsidies, he said that certain societal segments will continue to be able to buy subsidized fuel if they are part of certain social welfare programs. And this is also what the IMF had said repeatedly before, is that the program was trying to streamline the way that subsidies were being given out to citizens, because the fund found that the subsidy system before had been quite inefficient and a lot of people were benefiting from it without deserving to.
The budget was approved by the country's cabinet 2 weeks ago and is now pending House approval. That's all for this morning's headlines. You can get these stories and follow live updates at our site. Ban Barqawi, The National.